Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking on classical Greece, a civilization that didn't just lay a foundation for the West, but really it set the standards we still measure ourselves by in art, politics, you name it.
Exactly. And we have a huge set of sources today spanning nearly 2,000 years, from about 2000 BC to 300 BC. The whole mission here is to give you a really quick but deep understanding of how this small peninsula became, well, the philosophical engine of the Western world.
And to even start that story, you have to talk about the mountains. It's the elephant in the room, right? When you look at Greece, almost three-fourths of it is just rugged, impassable mountain ranges.
And that single fact dictated everything. It meant they could never really unite. Greece wasn't a single country, not in the way we think of it. It was always this collection of small, fiercely independent little communities.
Which, of course, explains why the sea was so incredibly important.
It had to be. There was hardly any good farmland, not enough to feed everyone. They were short on timber, on metals. They had to look outward.
And they were never that far from the coast. Maybe 50, 80 miles at most.
Right. So that constraint, that geography, it didn't crush them. It actually forced them to be innovators, to be traders, to become this global-facing culture right from the very beginning.
Okay, so let's get into those earliest sages, the Bronze Age. Our sources really point to two key cultures. First, the Minoans.
Right. On the island of Crete, way back before 3000 BC, a really advanced seafaring people.
And then on the mainland, you get the Mycenaeans around 2000 BC.
And they were more of a warrior society, but what's so crucial is that they basically absorbed the Minoan culture. They adapted their writing system, their art, their religion. That transfer of knowledge is the absolute bedrock of what we think of as Greek culture.
This all sort of crystallizes into legend around 1200 BC with the Trojan War. For centuries, people thought it was just a myth.
Until Heinrich Schliemann starts digging in the 19th century and finds evidence that, maybe these legends were actually based on real places and events.
And that war happens right around the time everything else collapses.
A total societal collapse. The Mycenaean civilization ends, partly from war, partly because a new group, the Dorians, arrives. And this kicks off a 400-year dark age.
So trade is gone, the economy tanks.
And tragically, they lose the art of writing. It just vanishes for centuries.
So how do you hold a culture together for 400 years if you can't write anything down?
Through stories, through the oral tradition. And this is where Homer comes in. When the Iliad and the Odyssey are finally written down around 750 BC, they aren't just literature. They're history, they're religion, they're a moral textbook. They gave the Greeks this heroic ideal.
The ideal of Arato.
Arato, which means, well, virtue or excellence.
It's about being the best you can be.
Constantly. It's about striving for fame, for what they called kleos. You see it perfectly with Hector in the Iliad. He knows he's going to die fighting Achilles, but he refuses to run away because it would be a disgrace. He chooses death over dishonor to win glory for himself and his family. That ideal shaped Greek culture for centuries.
And it wasn't just heroes. The myths from poets like Homer and Hesiod, they explained the world, right? They gave reasons for the mysteries of nature and human passions.
All those gods on Mount Olympus, Zeus, Hera, Athena, they embodied jealousy and love and rage. The myths were a way of understanding a chaotic world.
Okay, so the Dark Age ends, and a new political idea emerges. The polis.
The city-state. Around 750 BC. And this is the fundamental building block of Greek identity. They were tiny, often fewer than 10,000 people.
Centered around two key places, the fortified hilltop, the Acropolis.
And the Agora, the public marketplace down below. And because they were so small and independent, their whole political experience was just different. It allowed them to experiment like crazy.
They cycled through different governments.
All of them. They started with monarchy, ruled by a king. Then you get aristocracy, ruled by the landowning nobles.
But then trade expands and wealth isn't just about land anymore.
Exactly. So that leads to oligarchy, ruled by a few powerful, wealthy merchants.
And when the common people felt exploited by the oligarchs, that created an opening for tyrants.
And we have to be clear about that word. A tyrant in ancient Greece wasn't always a bad guy. They were just someone who seized power, often with the people's support, to break the power of the aristocrats. They were actually a key step on the road to democracy.
And a place that really ran with that experiment was Athens.
It was a slow process, though, a series of reforms. The first big step was Draco in 621 BC.
Draco's famous for writing the first legal code. The idea that everyone is equal under the law.
A revolutionary idea.
Yeah.
But the laws themselves were brutal. I mean, the death penalty for almost everything. It's why we still call harsh laws draconian. and he kept debt slavery.
So that wasn't going to last. In 594 BC, Solon comes in.
Solon was the real game changer. He outlawed debt slavery completely. He said no citizen should ever own another citizen, and he opened up the assembly to all classes of citizens.
A huge step. And then finally Cleisthenes around 500 BC.
He's the one who really establishes democracy. He boosts the power of the assembly and creates the Council of 500, a group chosen completely by random lot.
But let's be honest about the limits here. Athenian democracy was direct democracy, citizens ruled directly, but citizen was a very exclusive club.
Oh, absolutely. You had to be a free adult male born in Athens, so that excludes all women, all slaves, all foreigners. We're talking maybe 10 to 15% of the population actually got to participate.
And you see that limitation so clearly in the lives of men and women. Boys were educated for citizenship. They learned logic, public speaking.
All to prepare them for the assembly. Meanwhile, Athenian girls were educated at home just for domestic life, child rearing, managing a household. One source literally describes a wife's best exercise as kneading dough. They were completely shut out of public life.
Which is the perfect contrast to their biggest rival, Sparta.
A complete 180. Sparta's entire society was engineered out of pure terror.
Because they had conquered their neighbors, the Messenians, and turned them into state-owned slaves, the Helots.
And the Helots outnumbered the Spartans 8-1, so the constant, overwhelming fear was revolt. Their solution was to get rid of everything else, art, philosophy, luxury, and dedicate themselves completely to military discipline.
It was an unbelievable regimen. Boys left home at 7 for military training. They lived in barracks until they were 30, served in the army until they were 60.
And that life of austerity created this fascinating twist for Spartan women.
They had way more freedom than Athenian women.
So much more. Because the men were always away training or fighting, the women ran the estates, they handled the money. They were expected to be physically strong to produce strong soldiers for the state.
And all that military focus, plus cheaper iron weapons, led them to invent the phalanx.
This disciplined block of soldiers with massive spears, it became the most powerful fighting formation in the ancient world.
And they were about to need it, because the Persian Empire decided it was time to deal with the Greeks.
Which brings us to the Persian Wars. King Darius of Persia was furious that Athens had supported a Greek revolt in Ionia.
So in 490 BC, he sends 25,000 troops to the Bay of Marathon.
And they're met by just 10,000 Athenian hoplites in their phalanxes. The Athenians just crushed them. And that's where we get the legend of Phidippides running 26 miles back to Athens to yell, "Rejoice, we conquer!" It was this massive confidence boost.
But the Persians weren't done. 10 years later, Darius' son Xerxes comes back with a truly gigantic invasion force.
And this leads to that iconic moment at Thermopylae, the 300 Spartans holding the pass for 3 days.
A suicide mission, but it bought the rest of Greece time.
Crucial time, and the final victory came at sea at the Battle of Salamis. The Athenian fleet tricked the huge Persian navy into a narrow strait and just annihilated them. That victory secured Greek freedom and kicked off their golden age.
Athens emerges as the leader, forms this alliance called the Delian League.
Which it quickly turns into its own personal empire. And all that power, all that wealth flows right back into Athens during the age of Pericles.
Pericles had 3 big goals: strengthen democracy, strengthen the empire, and glorify Athens.
He started paying public officials so even poor citizens could serve. He built up the navy. And then he used the League's money to make Athens the most beautiful city in the world.
The centerpiece being the Parthenon.
A masterpiece of what we call classical art. The whole aesthetic was about finding the ideal, not realism, but perfection, harmony, balance, order, the idealized human form.
But the real revolution of this era wasn't in marble, it was in the mind.
It was philosophy, the love of wisdom. And it really arose because people started questioning everything after the wars. The key figure, of course, is Socrates.
His whole thing was challenging people. The unexamined life is not worth living. He wanted people to question their own beliefs, their own morals.
He drove people crazy, and eventually they put him on trial for corrupting the youth and executed him.
And that had a huge effect on his student Plato.
A massive effect. Plato wrote The Republic, where he basically argued that democracy was flawed because it led to mob rule, like the kind that killed his teacher. He wanted a society run by the wisest, the philosopher kings.
And Plato's student was Aristotle, who took philosophy and just applied it to everything.
He invented the system of logic that is the basis for the modern scientific method. He was intensely practical. Even in politics, he argued that a strong middle class was the key to a stable state, to avoid the extremes.
But all of this amazing intellectual growth was happening under the shadow of a coming war.
The Peloponnesian War. Between the Athenian Empire and the Spartan-led League, it started in 431 BC.
It was a total stalemate. Athens had the navy, Sparta had the army.
And Pericles' strategy was to pull everyone inside the city walls and just wait Sparta out. But then disaster struck.
A plague. It swept through the overcrowded city, killed a third of the population, including Pericles himself.
The war just dragged on for 27 years. It was brutal. Athens finally surrendered in 404 BC, completely broken.
But it wasn't a victory for anyone, really. The war just left all of Greece exhausted and vulnerable.
And that opened the door for a power to the north. Macedonia.
A kingdom the Greeks looked down on as a bunch of backwoods barbarians.
But their king, Philip II, was a military genius. He perfected the phalanx, gave his soldiers these massive 18-foot pikes, and by 338 BC, he had conquered all of Greece. The age of the independent city-state was over.
Philip was assassinated just as he was planning to invade Persia, and the throne passed to his 20-year-old son,
Alexander, tutored by Aristotle, and he had one driving ambition: to finish what his father started and conquer Persia.
His campaign is just legendary. He crushes the Persian Empire. He's crowned pharaoh in Egypt, where he founds the city of Alexandria.
He just keeps pushing east, all the way to India, until his own exhausted troops finally refuse to go any farther.
He dies suddenly at age 32, and his empire shatters, but the cultural impact was permanent. This is the birth of Hellenistic culture.
Hellenistic just means Greek-like, and it was this incredible blend of Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and Indian cultures. For the first time, Greek ideas spread across 3 continents.
Held together by a common language, Koine Greek, which made trade and learning possible across this vast area.
And you see huge societal shifts. Monarchy replaces the polis. And women, for the first time, start getting rights to education and to own property.
And the center of this new world was Alexandria in Egypt. It was the hub of commerce, of learning.
It had the Great Pharos Lighthouse, over 350 feet tall. It had the museum, which was like university. But the jewel in the crown was the library.
The first true research library in history. 500,000 scrolls, an attempt to collect all the world's knowledge.
And this focus on knowledge led to unbelievable scientific leaps. You have Aristarchus, who figures out that the Earth revolves around the sun, a theory that was then ignored for 1,400 years.
Wow. But others were incredibly accurate. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth and was astonishingly close.
And you have the giants, Euclid, whose work is still the basis for geometry, and Archimedes, who calculated pi, explained the lever. I mean, just foundational stuff.
And the art changed, too. It moved away from that perfect, idealized classical style.
And toward gritty realism. Hellenistic sculptures are emotional, they're detailed. You see an old, wrinkled peasant woman, not a perfect goddess. It reflected the complexity of this new, blended world.
So we've traced this incredible journey from these tiny, isolated communities to this vast, interconnected Hellenistic world where Greek ideas were spread everywhere.
Exactly. And that brings us to our final thought.
So here it is. The intense rivalry and the wars between the city-states, especially Athens and Sparta, led to their downfall. They were conquered by Macedonia. But that conquest is the very thing that spread Greek culture across the globe and preserved it for history. So we have to ask, did the Greek city-states have to lose their independence for Greek culture to achieve immortality?